The mystery of the missing money. Sarah's voice trembled as she clutched her phone tightly. Michael. Michael, please come quickly. My house has been robbed. I don't know what to do. Everything is gone. I'm ruined. Detective Michael, known for his calm demeanor and razor-sharp instincts, immediately picked up on the desperation in her voice. All right, Sarah, take a deep breath, he said firmly but reassuringly. I'm on my way. Don't touch anything until I get there. Within minutes, Michael arrived at Sarah's house. He had barely stepped through the front door when he noticed her pacing in the living room, her face pale and her hands trembling. It's all gone, Michael, she exclaimed, rushing toward him. The money, all of it. I kept $500,000 in cash in my bedroom cupboard, and now it's disappeared. Michael held up a hand to calm her. Start from the beginning, Sarah. I need to know everything. When did you notice the money was missing? I came back from picking up my kids from school, she said, her voice unsteady. The house seemed fine at first, but then I went into my bedroom and saw the cupboard open, things thrown everywhere. That's when I realized the cash was gone. All right, Michael said, taking out his notebook and pen. Let's take this one step at a time. Where exactly was the money kept? Was it hidden? Sarah pointed toward the bedroom with shaky fingers. In the cupboard. I thought it was secure. I mean, who would even know about it? Michael followed her into the room. The scene was chaotic. Clothes were strewn across the bed and floor. Drawers had been pulled out and emptied, and the cupboard doors hung open ominously. He walked up to the cupboard and examined it closely. This doesn't look random, he muttered. Someone was looking for something specific. Are you sure it was just the cash that was taken? Yes, absolutely, Sarah replied. Everything else is still here. The jewelry, important documents. Just the money is gone. Michael nodded thoughtfully. That's unusual. Most thieves would grab anything of value in a hurry. But let's not jump to conclusions yet. He crouched down to inspect the cupboard more closely, slipping on a pair of gloves. There are fingerprints here, he said, more to himself than to Sarah. Probably yours, but we'll need to verify. I'll send these prints to the lab for analysis. As he stood up, his eyes scanned the room. The front door had been locked when he arrived, yet the bedroom window was broken, shards of glass glinting in the sunlight. Something about the scene didn't sit right with him. Michael, Sarah said hesitantly, do you think it was someone who knew about the money? Someone close to me? It's too early to say, Michael replied. But I will say this. Whoever did this was deliberate. They knew what they were looking for, and they didn't waste time on anything else. Sarah looked uneasy. What are you thinking? The front door was locked, but the window was broken, Michael began. That suggests the intruder didn't come in through the window. They staged this to make it look like a break-in. And look here. He pointed to the broken window. There's broken glass outside, but not inside. If someone broke the window to get in, the glass would be on both sides. This was done from the inside. Sarah's eyes widened. So you think they were already in the house? It's a possibility, Michael said, frowning. Tell me, who else has access to your house? Well, it's just me and my kids who live here, Sarah said quickly. But there's also Mary, my maid. She's been with us for years, though. I trust her completely. And James, the security guard who's stationed outside. Other than them, no one. Michael nodded. All right. I'll need to speak to both of them. Are they here? Sarah hesitated. Mary should be around. James is usually at the gate. Call them both, please, Michael instructed. I need to ask them some questions. Sarah nodded and left the room. Michael stayed behind, his mind racing as he pieced together what little information he had. Something wasn't adding up. The stage break-in, the deliberate targeting of the cash, the lack of other valuables being taken. It all pointed to an inside job. But who would have done it? And why? Moments later, Sarah returned with Mary, a middle-aged woman with nervous eyes, and James, a young man who looked equally uneasy. Mary, Michael began, where were you when this happened? I was in the kitchen, Mary stammered. I might have dozed off for a bit. I didn't hear or see anything. Michael narrowed his eyes. You're sure you didn't leave the kitchen? Not even for a moment. Mary shook her head. No, sir. I swear. Turning to James, Michael asked, "And you? Were you at your post the entire time?" "Yes, sir," James replied. "I didn't see anyone go in or out. I was right there." Michael studied both of them for a moment. "All right. For now, I'll take your word for it. But I need you both to stay available for further questioning." Just then, Michael's phone buzzed. It was the lab report on the fingerprints. He read it carefully, his brow furrowing as he processed the information. "Interesting," he said aloud. "What is it?" Sarah asked anxiously. "The fingerprints on the cupboard belong to you, Mary, and someone we haven't identified yet," Michael replied. Mary looked visibly shaken. "I must have touched the cupboard when I was cleaning," she stammered. Michael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked over to the window and examined it again. A glint of something caught his eye. A small piece of glass stuck to some tape on the window frame. His mind raced as he pieced together the clues. "Sarah," he said slowly, "does anyone else know about this money? Anyone outside of your household?" "No," Sarah replied quickly. "At least, I don't think so." Michael picked up a handkerchief lying near the window. It had a strange scent that he recognized immediately. Turning back to Sarah, he asked, "Does this belong to anyone in your house?" "No," Sarah said, frowning. "I've never seen that before." Michael's jaw tightened. "I know this scent. It belongs to Jack, a known troublemaker in the area. I think it's time I paid him a visit." Detective Michael entered Sarah's bedroom, his trained eyes quickly scanning the scene. The room, which was otherwise neatly maintained, now looked like a whirlwind had passed through it. Clothes were thrown haphazardly across the bed and floor, and drawers were half pulled out from the cupboard, spilling their contents onto the ground. The air felt thick with tension, a mixture of Sarah's panic and the unsettling sight of the ransacked space. Michael walked over to the cupboard, crouching down to take a closer look. "So, this is where the money was kept?" he asked, glancing back at Sarah. "Yes, right here," Sarah confirmed, pointing to an empty shelf in the cupboard. Her voice wavered as she spoke. "It was hidden in an envelope behind some of my clothes. I thought it was safe here." Michael nodded, his gloved hands carefully examining the cupboard's interior. "Why keep so much money in cash at home, Sarah? That's quite an amount. $500,000 is no small sum." Sarah fidgeted, avoiding his gaze. "I had my reasons," she muttered. "It was for a business investment. I was going to deposit it into the bank next week." Michael didn't press further. Instead, he leaned in closer, his flashlight revealing faint smudges on the surface of the cupboard. "There are fingerprints here," he murmured to himself. Then, addressing Sarah, he asked, "Have you touched this area recently?" Sarah shook her head vigorously. "No, not at all. I only opened it when I saw everything scattered like this. But those aren't my fingerprints, Michael, I swear." Michael held up a reassuring hand. "It's all right, Sarah. We'll send these prints to the lab for analysis. They might give us some answers." He pulled out a small kit from his bag and began dusting the cupboard for prints. As he worked methodically, Sarah hovered nearby, her anxiety palpable. "How long do these things usually take?" she asked hesitantly. "Not long," Michael replied without looking up. "But this isn't the only thing we need to examine." He finished collecting the prints and straightened up, turning his attention to the rest of the room. His eyes immediately fell on the broken window. The shards of glass on the floor caught the light, forming a jagged halo around the window frame. "Was the window like this when you arrived?" he asked, gesturing toward it. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "I noticed it right after I saw the cupboard." "Do you think that's how they got in?" Michael walked over to the window, his sharp eyes analyzing every detail. The frame had a small piece of tape with a shard of glass still stuck to it. He tilted his head, deep in thought, before turning back to Sarah. "Something feels off about this," he said. "If someone broke the window to get inside, there should be glass both inside and outside the house. But look, most of it is scattered outside. That suggests the glass was broken from the inside, not the outside." Sarah's eyes widened in confusion. "From the inside? But that doesn't make sense. Why would someone break the window after already being inside?" Michael crossed his arms, his expression serious. "That's exactly what we need to figure out. Whoever did this wanted it to look like a break-in. But if they staged the window, it means they were already in the house. Sarah's face turned pale. Are you saying it could be someone I know? Someone who has access to my home? Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved toward a handkerchief lying near the foot of the bed. The crisp white cloth seemed oddly out of place among the disarray. He picked it up carefully, noting its peculiar scent. Does this belong to you or anyone in your family? He asked, holding it up. Sarah shook her head. No, I've never seen that before. Michael brought the handkerchief closer to his face, sniffing it cautiously. A faint, musky scent filled his nostrils, a scent he recognized all too well. His eyes narrowed as he pieced together the connection. I think I know who this belongs to, he said grimly. Who? Sarah asked, leaning forward. Michael pocketed the handkerchief and turned back toward the cupboard. Before we jump to conclusions, I need to question everyone who was in or near this house today. You said it's just you, your kids, your maid Mary, and your guard James, correct? Yes, that's right, Sarah replied. But Mary and James would never do something like this. They've been with me for years. Michael gave her a small, understanding smile. I'm not accusing anyone, Sarah, but everyone is a suspect until the evidence clears them. Call them here, please. I need to hear their version of events. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. All right, I'll get them. She hurried out of the room, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. He paced the room slowly, replaying the details in his mind. The broken window, the scattered items, the missing cash. It all felt too deliberate. Whoever had done this wasn't just after the money. They wanted to mislead anyone who came looking. A few minutes later, Sarah returned with Mary and James in tow. Mary was a petite woman in her 40s, her hands wringing nervously as she stepped into the room. James, on the other hand, was tall and sturdy, his uniform neatly pressed, but his shifting eyes betrayed his unease. Detective, Mary began timidly. Sarah said you wanted to ask me something. Yes, Michael said, gesturing for her to sit. Mary, where were you during the time this happened? Be honest with me. It's important. Mary fumbled with her apron strings. I was in the kitchen, sir, she said, her voice shaky. I might have dozed off. I didn't hear or see anything, I swear. Michael studied her face carefully, noting her nervous demeanor. And did you leave the kitchen at any point, even for a moment? Mary shook her head quickly. No, sir. I stayed there the whole time. Michael turned his attention to James. What about you? Were you at your post outside the entire time? Yes, sir, James replied, standing stiffly. I didn't see anyone go in or out. Everything seemed normal until Sarah called for help. Michael leaned back, his mind racing. Interesting. If neither of you saw anything, how do you explain the fingerprints on the cupboard and the staged window? Both Mary and James exchanged uneasy glances, but said nothing. I'll need you both to remain available for further questioning, Michael said firmly. As they left the room, Michael pulled out his phone and called his team. I've collected prints from the scene, he told them. Send a report as soon as possible. We might have more than one suspect here. His eyes returned to the broken window. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but the picture wasn't yet complete. Detective Michael carefully examined the prints he had lifted from the cupboard earlier. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. It was his team with an update from the lab, answering it immediately. He nodded as the technician on the other end spoke. 3 sets of fingerprints, the voice said. One belongs to Sarah, the second to Mary, the maid, and the third is unknown. We're running it through the database now. Michael thanked them, hung up, and rubbed his chin in thought. Sarah's prints were expected. She lived in the house and had admitted opening the cupboard before discovering the theft. Mary's prints weren't too surprising either. As the maid, she had likely cleaned or organized the space. But the third set, that was the wild card. An unknown print, Michael murmured to himself. Someone who shouldn't have been here. Sarah had been sitting quietly on the edge of her bed, watching Michael's every move. She shifted uncomfortably as she saw his brow furrow in concentration. What does it mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It means someone else touched that cupboard, Michael replied. Someone who doesn't belong in this house. Sarah's face paled further, and she clasped her hands together. Do you think it was the thief? The person who took the money? Possibly, Michael said. But we can't rule out the idea that they had help from someone who does belong here. Sarah's jaw dropped. You're saying it could be Mary? Or James? That's absurd. They would never. I'm not accusing anyone yet, Michael interrupted, his tone calm but firm. I'm just following the evidence. He moved to the window, crouching to get a closer look at the broken glass. A piece of tape, with a shard still clinging to it, caught his eye. His gloved fingers traced the frame as he observed the odd placement of the shattered glass. Most of it was outside on the ground. The room inside had very little, almost as if the glass had been deliberately swept toward the exterior. Sarah, he called over his shoulder, when you found this window, was the glass already like this? Yes, she replied, rising to her feet. When I came in, the window was broken just like it is now. I assumed it's how the thief got in. Michael stood and faced her, his arms crossed. The glass outside suggests otherwise. If someone had broken the window from the outside to get in, there'd be shards both inside and out. But most of it is outside, which means the glass was pushed outward. This wasn't their way in. It was staged to make us think it was. Staged? Sarah's voice trembled. But why would anyone go to that trouble? To cover their tracks, Michael replied. It's a common trick. If the break-in looks convincing enough, no one questions whether the thief was already inside. Sarah sank back onto the bed, her hand pressed to her forehead. This is all too much. Do you think someone was inside my house while I was gone? Not just inside, Michael said, his voice steady. They might have been someone you trust, or at least someone you didn't expect. The tension in the room thickened. Michael took a step back and surveyed the space, mentally piecing together the timeline. The staged window, the fingerprints, and the unknown third suspect painted a murky picture. Do you have a security system? Michael asked abruptly. Sarah blinked at him, caught off guard by the sudden question. Yes, but it's old. I haven't gotten around to upgrading it. There's a camera at the front door, but it hasn't worked in months. No footage then, Michael muttered. What about the locks? Are they secure? They are, Sarah confirmed. The front door was locked when I got home. I had to unlock it myself. Michael raised an eyebrow. From the outside? Yes, she said. Why? That means the thief didn't leave through the front door, Michael explained. If they did, they would have had to unlock it, and it wouldn't have been locked when you came back. Whoever it was must have left through another way. Or maybe... He trailed off, his eyes narrowing as he returned to the window. The pieces of glass glittered in the afternoon sun, and something about their arrangement clicked into place. Or maybe, Michael said slowly, they didn't leave at all when you first got home. Sarah gasped. Are you saying the thief was still inside the house when I walked in? It's possible, Michael admitted. If they were careful, they could have hidden until they had a chance to slip out unnoticed. Sarah shuddered at the thought. That's terrifying. Do you think they're still here? Michael shook his head. Unlikely. They'd have left the moment they knew the house wasn't empty anymore. But it's something to keep in mind. He pulled out his phone and dialed his team again. I need you to check the perimeter of the house, he instructed. See if there are any signs of a secondary exit, back doors, side gates, anything. As he hung up, he glanced back at Sarah, who looked visibly shaken. I need you to think carefully, Sarah. Is there anyone who knew about the money in the cupboard? Anyone who might have had a motive to take it? No, Sarah said, her voice strained. I kept it a secret. The only people who even knew it existed were me and... She stopped abruptly, her eyes widening. Go on, Michael urged gently. And Mary, Sarah finished in a whisper. She's the only other person who's been in this room recently. But she'd never. We'll find out soon enough, Michael said. For now, let's focus on the evidence. His phone buzzed again, and this time the voice on the other end delivered a critical update. The unknown fingerprints don't match anyone in the criminal database, but we'll keep searching. Thanks, Michael said, hanging up. He looked at the scene once more, his mind racing. Someone had been inside this house. Someone who had the time and knowledge to stage the break-in. But the question remained, were they an outsider who got lucky, or someone who was always supposed to be here? Michael took a deep breath and ran through the facts in his mind. The fingerprints, the broken window, and the locked door were beginning to form a picture, but he needed to narrow down his list of suspects. Sarah was still visibly shaken as she sat on the edge of her bed, wringing her hands nervously. "I need to know, Sarah," Michael said, his voice steady but probing. "Who else has access to this house? Besides you, of course." Sarah hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. "It's just Mary, my maid. She's been working here for over 5 years. She has a set of keys because she comes in to clean even when I'm not home. And then there's James, the security guard. James has keys as well," Michael asked, his tone sharpening. "Yes," Sarah admitted, "but only to the front gate, not the house itself. His job is to patrol the perimeter and ensure everything is secure. He wouldn't have had a reason to enter." Michael nodded, filing this information away. "So it's just the 3 of you with access. That narrows things down." Sarah looked uneasy. "You don't really think Mary or James could have done this, do you? They've been loyal for so long. James even helped me fix a flat tire last week." "Loyalty doesn't rule out desperation or opportunity," Michael replied. "I need to speak with both of them to understand what happened." Before Sarah could respond, Michael's sharp eyes caught a flash of something on the floor near the window. He crouched down, pulling out a pair of tweezers from his kit, and carefully picked up a handkerchief. It was white, but its embroidered edge and strong, musky scent immediately drew his attention. "Does this belong to you or anyone in the house?" Michael asked, holding it up for Sarah to see. Sarah shook her head firmly. "No, I've never seen that before, and I definitely don't use cologne that smells like that." Michael brought the handkerchief closer to his nose and sniffed. The scent was unmistakable. He straightened up, a grim look settling on his face. "I know this smell," he muttered to himself. Sarah frowned. "What do you mean? How can you recognize a scent?" "It's distinctive," Michael replied, "and I've come across it before. This cologne is favored by a local troublemaker named Jack. He's been involved in petty thefts and burglaries in the past. Nothing too big, but he has a knack for slipping in and out of places unnoticed." Sarah's eyes widened. "Are you saying Jack was here? That he broke into my house?" "It's a possibility," Michael said, "but it doesn't explain everything. If Jack did take the money, how did he know where to look? And why did he leave this behind?" Sarah looked down at the floor, her face pale. "What if someone told him? What if Mary or James?" Michael cut her off. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Jack's involvement could be a coincidence, but it's worth investigating. If he's connected, he might have answers." Without wasting time, Michael pulled out his phone and called his team. "I need you to track down Jack," he instructed. "Start with the usual spots. Check the abandoned warehouse on Green Lane. He's often seen hanging out there." He ended the call and turned back to Sarah. "I'll need to speak with Mary and James next. Can you call them here?" "Of course," Sarah said, hurrying to make the calls. While waiting, Michael studied the handkerchief again. It seemed deliberately placed, as though someone had dropped it to mislead him. But Jack wasn't the kind of person to be careless. This added another layer of doubt to the puzzle. 15 minutes later, Mary and James arrived. Mary, a middle-aged woman with a nervous disposition, wrung her apron in her hands as she stood in the living room. James, on the other hand, was calm and confident, his security uniform pristine as he stood at attention. Michael wasted no time. "Mary, where were you when this happened?" "I was in the kitchen, sir," Mary stammered. "I had finished cleaning upstairs and decided to take a short break. I didn't hear or see anything unusual." "Did you touch the cupboard in Sarah's room recently?" Michael pressed. Mary hesitated, her cheeks flushing. I did, sir. Yesterday, while dusting. But only to clean the handles. I didn't open it, I swear." Michael studied her carefully, noting her trembling hands. "And you didn't see anyone suspicious near the house? No one came to the door or lingered outside?" "No, sir," Mary replied. "At least, not that I saw." Michael shifted his attention to James. "What about you? Where were you when Sarah was out?" "I was at my post, sir," James said firmly. Outside the house. I didn't see anyone come in or out, and the gate was locked the whole time. Did you hear the window breaking? James frowned, shaking his head. No, I didn't. If it happened while I was making my rounds, I might have missed it, but I didn't notice anything unusual. Michael's gaze bore into James, but the man held his composure. As the questioning continued, Michael's phone buzzed. It was his team again. We found Jack, the voice on the other end reported. He's claiming he had nothing to do with the robbery, but he's nervous. Says he didn't steal anything but might know who did. Michael's grip on the phone tightened. Keep him there. I'm on my way. Ending the call, he addressed Sarah, Mary, and James. Stay here. I need to follow up on a lead. Is it Jack? Sarah asked, her voice tinged with both hope and fear. Michael nodded. Yes. If he's involved, we'll know soon enough. As he headed out, Michael's mind raced. Jack's connection to the crime was tenuous, but the handkerchief was a lead he couldn't ignore. The bigger question loomed in his mind. If Jack wasn't the thief, then who was? Michael stood in front of Jack, his arms crossed as he fixed the wiry young man with a piercing gaze. Jack sat on a worn chair in the dimly lit interrogation room, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. Sweat glistened on his forehead despite the cool air of the room, and his eyes darted nervously from Michael to the officer standing by the door. You know why you're here, Jack, Michael said, his voice calm but firm. We found your handkerchief at Sarah's house. You've been around this block too many times for me to believe this is a coincidence. So, why don't you start talking? Jack leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. I swear, Detective, I didn't take anything. I don't even know why I left the stupid handkerchief behind, he blurted out, his voice trembling. Michael raised an eyebrow. That's a good start, Jack, but it doesn't explain why you were there in the first place. The evidence places you inside the house. So, let's cut the games. What were you doing there? Jack let out a shaky sigh and rubbed his face. Fine. I'll tell you everything. I went to the house that afternoon. I knew Sarah wasn't home, and I saw Mary leave to throw out the trash. I figured it was my chance to grab something quick and get out. I didn't want to hurt anyone, I swear. And the window? Michael asked, leaning forward. I broke it when I was leaving, Jack admitted. I thought if it looked like a break-in, no one would suspect I was already inside. I smashed it from the inside and climbed out. But by then, I was panicking. Michael's eyes narrowed. Why the panic, Jack? You've pulled stunts like this before without a hitch. Jack hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. Because when I opened the cupboard to take the money, it was already gone, he said finally. Michael's brow furrowed. Already gone? Are you saying you didn't take the cash? No, Jack exclaimed. I swear on my life, Detective, the cupboard was empty. Someone else must have taken it before I even got there. I freaked out and ran. Michael scrutinized him for a long moment, his instincts searching for any sign of deception. But Jack's panicked demeanor seemed genuine. You expect me to believe you broke into a house, smashed a window, and left without taking anything? Michael pressed. Jack threw up his hands in frustration. I know it sounds crazy, but it's the truth. The money was already gone, and I didn't want to stick around and get caught for something I didn't even take. Michael straightened up, his mind racing. If Jack's story was true, then someone else had to have taken the money. But who? Back at Sarah's house, Michael confronted Mary. She was sitting in the kitchen, clutching a cup of tea with trembling hands. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted nervously as Michael sat across from her. Mary, Michael began, his voice measured. Jack has confessed to being in the house that day, but he claims the money was already gone when he got to the cupboard. I need you to tell me everything you did that afternoon. Mary's hand shook, and she set the cup down with a clatter. I told you everything, sir. I was cleaning. Then I went to take out the trash. That's all. Michael leaned forward, his gaze intense. That's not the whole truth, is it? Did you open the cupboard before you left? Mary froze, her eyes wide. I didn't mean to, sir, she said in a small voice. I wasn't going to take anything, I swear. I was just cleaning, and I saw the cupboard slightly ajar. I opened it to make sure everything was neat inside. What happened next? Michael asked, his tone gentle but firm. I saw the money, Mary whispered. Stacks of it. I've never seen so much cash in my life. I panicked. I don't know why. I just felt like I shouldn't have seen it. So I closed the cupboard, but I didn't lock it. I was so nervous. I just ran out to throw the trash. And what time was this? Michael pressed. Mary furrowed her brow, trying to remember. It must have been around 2:25. I was only gone for a few minutes. I came back, finished cleaning the kitchen, and then Sarah came home. I didn't touch the cupboard again, I promise. Michael sat back, piecing the timeline together. Jack had entered the house while Mary was outside. But if her story was true, she hadn't taken the money either. Mary, Michael said, his voice firm, if you're lying to me, now is the time to come clean. Did you take the money? No, Mary cried, tears streaming down her face. I would never do that to Miss Sarah. She's been so good to me. I didn't take a single rupee. Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. Both Jack and Mary's stories aligned, but they only deepened the mystery. If neither of them had taken the money, then who had? He glanced at the cupboard again, its open doors standing as a silent witness to the events of the day. Something wasn't adding up. Michael turned to Sarah, who was standing by the door, watching the conversation unfold. Tell me again, he said slowly. Who else knew about the money in that cupboard? Sarah hesitated, her face pale. No one, she said quietly. Michael's eyes bore into hers. Are you sure about that, Sarah? Because if someone else knew, they might be the key to solving this case. Sarah didn't answer, but the flicker of guilt in her eyes didn't escape Michael's notice. A new suspicion began to form in his mind, one that he wasn't ready to voice just yet. But he would get to the bottom of it. He always did. Michael leaned against the kitchen counter, his sharp gaze fixed on Sarah. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence thick enough to slice through. He crossed his arms and spoke slowly, his voice calm but weighted. Sarah, there's one more thing I need to ask you, he began. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you recently take out an insurance policy on the cash that was stolen? Sarah's face froze. Her eyes widened for a split second before she quickly looked away, fiddling with her hands. I don't see how that's relevant, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael tilted his head, his lips pressing into a thin line. It's very relevant, he said, stepping closer, because if there's an insurance policy in place, it gives you a strong motive to stage this entire thing. Her head snapped up, her expression shifting between panic and defiance. You think I did this? That I would rob my own house? That's absurd. Michael didn't flinch. Is it? Sarah, you told me the money was kept in the cupboard, locked away safely. You mentioned only a few people had access to the house. Your maid, the guard, and yourself. But now we know that Jack, who broke in, didn't find anything in the cupboard. Mary claims she didn't take it, and the timeline matches, which leaves only one possibility. Sarah took a step back, shaking her head. No, this is ridiculous. You're accusing me of what fraud? You have no proof. Michael's voice remained steady, but his words struck like a hammer. The proof is in the inconsistencies, Sarah. You told me you found the cupboard open when you got home, but if you locked it before leaving, how did that happen? And why were the broken glass and the handkerchief conveniently placed to make this look like a break-in? It's almost too perfect. Sarah clutched the edge of the table, her breathing uneven. You're wrong, she murmured. Michael leaned in, his eyes narrowing. Am I? Or did you leave the cupboard unlocked on purpose, hoping someone like Jack would stumble upon it and become the scapegoat? You counted on him, smashing the window, to stage the crime, didn't you? All of this, he gestured around the room, was part of your plan to file an insurance claim. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she slumped into a chair. Her hands trembled as she covered her face. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she finally admitted, her voice breaking. Michael sat down across from her, his tone softening slightly. Then tell me the truth, Sarah. Why did you do it? She sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I was desperate. I've been struggling for months. Debts piling up, the kids' school fees. I didn't know what else to do. When I realized I could take out an insurance policy on the cash, it seemed like a way out. Her voice cracked as she continued. I thought if I made it look like a robbery, the insurance would cover the loss, and no one would get hurt. I didn't think it would get so complicated. I didn't think Jack would actually show up, or that you'd figure it all out. Michael sighed, his expression a mixture of disappointment and understanding. Sarah, you could have asked for help. Staging a crime like this, it's not just fraud. It's a serious offense. You implicated innocent people, Mary, James, even Jack. I know, Sarah said, her face buried in her hands. I didn't think about the consequences. I just saw a way to fix everything, and I acted out of desperation. Michael stood, his tone firm. Desperation doesn't excuse what you've done, but I'll do my best to make sure the authorities understand your situation. You'll have to face the consequences, Sarah, but there's still a chance to make things right. Sarah nodded weakly, her tears falling silently onto the table. As the officers escorted Sarah out of the house, Michael lingered for a moment, gazing at the now empty cupboard. Another case solved, but this one left a bitter taste. Greed, fear, desperation. It had all collided in a way that ruined lives. He turned to Mary and James, who stood silently by the doorway. Thank you for your cooperation, he said, his tone sincere. You both were put in a terrible position, but the truth came out in the end. Mary nodded, her eyes still wide with the shock of everything that had unfolded. I never thought Miss Sarah would do something like this. People do strange things when they feel trapped, Michael said, heading toward the door. But remember this. The truth has a way of coming out, no matter how carefully it's buried. As he stepped outside, the cool breeze brushed against his face, carrying with it the weight of the case. It wasn't the cleanest resolution, but justice had been served. Michael walked to his car, his mind already turning to the next mystery, waiting to be unraveled.